Chapter 1. The Little Knife of Ivory. The first thing Alaric Voss noticed at Radcliffe Manor was not the house. The house had been designed to be noticed. It rose from the Wiltshire Downs in a long arrangement of pale stone, old glass, theatrical confidence, with two square towers at either end, like bookends, holding up a century of family pride. Every window on the eastern face had been polished so carefully that the late October light appeared trapped in them, divided into strict golden rectangles. The gravel drive curved around a dry fountain where a stone boy poured nothing from an empty shell. On the rim of that fountain sat a small ivory-handled fruit knife. It was too delicate for the outdoors, too clean for the garden, too carefully placed to have been dropped. Its little blade had been wiped, but not well enough to satisfy a man such as Voss. Post. He paused beside it, adjusted the cuff of his dove-grey glove, and looked at the knife as one might look at a stranger who had spoken out of turn. "You admire the fountain, Monsieur Voss?" asked Mr. Lionel Cresswell, the family solicitor, who had come to collect him from the station. "I admire precision," said Voss. "When an object is where it ought not to be, it has either been forgotten by a fool or placed by a clever person pretending to be one." Cresswell gave a dry laugh, the kind produced for clients rather than friends. "At Radcliffe Manor you will find many things out of place. Sir Edmund liked disorder in others. It made him feel superior. Sir Edmund Radcliffe had died the previous evening. During the dessert course of his own birthday dinner, he was 68, a collector of rare manuscripts, a widower, and by every account a man whose chief talent had been making gratitude feel like debt. The doctor had first called it a seizure. By midnight, when the local inspector found the locked study key in the dead man's waistcoat and a torn note in the grate, the word murder had begun moving through the manor like a draught under a door. Voss had been asked to come privately before the scandal made itself comfortable. He was a neat, narrow man in his early 40s, Swiss-born, smooth dark hair parted, so exactly it seemed measured. Nothing about him suggested haste. His overcoat sat upon him without a wrinkle. His shoes had survived the railway platform without surrendering their shine. In his left hand he carried a slim leather case. In his right, between two gloved fingers, he held a narrow strip of pale blue. As they walked toward the entrance, he tied one small knot in the ribbon. Cresswell watched the move. "Do you do that often?" "Only when people contradict themselves before speaking." The solicitor looked offended, then uncertain whether he had been insulted. He chose dignity and led the way up the steps. Inside, Radcliffe Manor smelled of beeswax, old paper, extinguished candles, and lilies beginning to tire in their vases. The entrance hall was tiled in black and white squares, each polished enough to show blurred reflection of the portraits above. Generations of Radcliffes stared down from gilded frame, all with the same heavy eyelids and the same expression of having been disappointed by England. At the foot of the staircase stood Lady Helena March, Sir Edmund's younger sister. She was tall, severe, and dressed in black, with the efficiency of a woman who had expected mourning and prepared for it in advance. Her silver hair was arranged in a smooth coil at the nape of her neck. Nothing about her trembled except the pearl at her throat quivered whenever she swallowed. "Monsieur Voss," she said, "we are grateful you came so quickly. I dislike strangers in family matters, but I dislike police curiosity even more." "You prefer truth to be handled with gloves," Voss replied. "I prefer truth to know its place." Voice had a clipped rhythm, as if every sentence had first been inspected for weakness. Behind her hovered Miss Clara Radcliffe, Sir Edmund's niece, 26, pale, large-eyed, and pretty, in the hesitant way of those who have been praised more for obedience than beauty. She twisted a handkerchief between her fingers until one corner had become a wet little rope. Beside the fireplace stood Reverend Amos Pike, the village vicar, a broad man with mild eyes and hands too soft for his age. He spoke to no one directly. His gaze drifted from portrait to portrait, as if searching among the dead for permission to remain among the living. Near the library doors, Captain Julian Harrow leaned on a cane he did not need. He had a handsome face slightly spoiled by self-knowledge. His military moustache was trimmed with care, yet his collar sat one notch too tight, pressing a red line into his neck. Men who dress for admiration often forget comfort And then there was Mrs. Beatrice Vale, Sir Edmund's housekeeper, stood so still she seemed part of the panelling. She was in her 50s, broad-shouldered, plain-faced, with capable hands folded at her waist, unlike the others. She did not study Voss. She studied the floor just before his feet touched it. That interested him. Lady Helena led them into the drawing-room, where the family had gathered after breakfast and eaten nothing. Silver tea service stood neglected on a low table. The milk had formed a thin skin. One cup showed a crescent of lipstick on its rim, bright and careless. The fire had been built too high, making the room smell faintly of singed dust. Inspector Merritt of the county police rose from a chair near the window, compact man, with sandy brows and boots, too muddy for Lady Helena's carpets. He looked at Voss with open doubt. "You are a private gentleman from London?" "I am from Lausanne," said Voss. "London merely tolerated me for the railway connection." Merritt sniffed. "Family asked for you. I have not objected, provided you do not move evidence, frighten servants, or explain my duties to me. I should never do 3 unnecessary things in one morning." Captain Harrow gave a little laugh, and turned it into a cough when nobody joined him. Merritt took out his notebook. Sir Edmund died at 10 minutes past 9. Present at dinner were Lady Helena, Miss Radcliffe, Captain Harrow, Reverend Pike, Mr. Cresswell, and Mrs. Vale, who supervised service. Also the footman, Thomas Reed, and the cook, Mrs. Ansell. Sir Edmund ate the same meal as everyone else, drank from the same decanter, and collapsed after the pear tart. "The pear tart," Voss said softly. Mrs. Vale's hands tightened once, then relaxed. Merritt continued. "The doctor found no wounds. There was a bitter smell in the glass near him. Brandy covers much. We have sent the glass away. His study was locked afterward, key in his pocket. In the grate we found scraps of burned paper. Peace survive. It reads only, 'Before the bell, tell her.'" Miss Clara made a small wounded sound. Lady Helena turned sharply. "Compose yourself, Clara. Grief is not improved by display." Clara lowered her eyes. "I am trying, Aunt Helena. I only thought of Uncle's voice. He said he would tell us something after dinner." "About the will?" asked Voss. Everyone looked at him. Cresswell cleared his throat. "Sir Edmund had summoned me regarding a chain, but he did not sign anything. I arrived yesterday afternoon. He wished the family a present at dinner before making an announcement." "And the current will?" The solicitor pressed his lips together. Professional's confidence. "A dead client has few conveniences left," said Voss. "But we shall return to that." Lady Helena's eyes hardened. "My brother enjoyed power. He enjoyed making people wait for kindness. That is hardly murder." "No," Voss said. "It is merely a motive factory. Room dislike that. One could feel it in the small movements." Captain Harrow shifted his cane from one hand to the other. The vicar rubbed his thumb over a dark mark on his cuff. Clara pulled the ruined handkerchief flat across her knees, then folded it along the same crease 3 times. Mrs. Vale looked toward the door, not to leave, but to measure who might enter. Voss took all this in without seeming to. He stood before the mantelpiece. Clock, shaped like a bronze hunting dog, ticked with nervous importance. Beside it lay a row of invitation cards, a silver matchbox, a single white glove. Not a lady's glove, too large. Not a servant's glove, too fine. He looked at it for no more than a second. Then he said, "Who arranged the flowers?" Lady Helena blinked. "The flowers? The lilies are dying before the roses. They were cut at different times. Someone refreshed the roses and left the lily. It is not important, naturally." Inspector Merritt stared at him. "Is it not? At present, nothing is important. Later, everything becomes impolite." Mrs. Vale spoke for the first time. Her voice was low, even, and practical. The voice of a woman accustomed to making rooms behave. "I changed the roses yesterday afternoon, sir." Sir Edmund disliked wilted flowers. The lilies were from the chapel arrangement. He wanted because of their scent, because Lady Radcliffe liked them when she was alive. For the first time, something in the room softened. Even Lady Helena looked away. Sir Edmund's dead wife had been gone 12 years, yet her preference had survived in lilies, in an old house, in the obedience of servants who had perhaps loved her more than they loved him. Voss untied the knot in his ribbon, considered, then tied it again tighter. "May I see the dining room?" he asked. They crossed the hall together. Dining room at Radcliffe Manor was long, dark panelled, and oppressive, with a table that could seat 24, and had seated 7. The remains of last night's grandeur had been cleared, but not entirely erased. Wax had fallen in pale drops along one brass candlestick. A crumb of pastry clung beneath Sir Edmund's chair. At his place, the carpet showed a faint oval mark where spilled brandy had been scrubbed. Above the sideboard hung a portrait of the late Lady Radcliffe. She had been painted in blue silk, one hand resting on an open music book, her expression gentler than the house deserved. The portrait faced the table directly. Voss stood before Sir Edmund's chair, and looked not at the stain, not at the glass marks, not at the chair. He looked at the portrait. Was this picture always here? Lady Helena frowned. Of course, Mrs. Vale answered at the same moment. Since Tuesday. The contradiction moved through the room with more force than accusation. Lady Helena turned on the housekeeper. That is absurd, Mrs. Vale remained still. It was in the morning room before Tuesday. Sir Edmund ordered Thomas to move it here. Why? Asked Voss. Mrs. Vale's face did not change, but her eyelids lowered. He did not explain himself to servants. Voss smiled faintly. People explain themselves constantly to servants. They simply do not use words. Captain Harrow gave an impatient tap of his cane. Are we to investigate furniture now? Sir Edmund was poisoned, was he not? Someone near him at dinner had the chance. That seems simpler than portraits and flowers. Simplicity is often only impatience in a clean collar, said Voss. The captain flushed. You have a talent for insults dressed as philosophy, and you have a talent for hearing yourself described. Inspector Merritt stepped between them with visible reluctance. Enough, Monsieur Voss. There is one matter you should. Captain Harrow was engaged to Miss Radcliffe until 3 weeks ago. Sir Edmund forbade the match after discovering debts. Clara looked up, stricken. Inspector, that was private. Death has poor manners, miss. Captain Harrow's jaw tightened. My debts are known. My quarrel with Sir Edmund is known. That makes me convenient, not guilty. Voss turned toward. Convenient people are rarely innocent of everything. The captain opened his mouth, then closed. For one moment his eyes moved not to Clara, nor to Lady Helena, but to Reverend Pike. The vicar noticed and looked down at his hand. There it was, a thread. Voss did not pull it, not yet. He walked slowly around the table. At each place a small card still sat in a silver holder. Lady Helena, Clara, Captain Harrow, Reverend Mr. Cresswell, Sir Edmund. One card lay face down near the far end. Voss lifted it with 2 fingers. Mrs. Vale. He turned it over. The handwriting was the same as the others, bold and angular, but the card had been crossed through once in pencil. You dined with the family? He asked. Mrs. Vale's face became carefully. Sir Edmund insisted. Lady Helena's mouth tightened. My brother had eccentric moods. He occasionally liked to remind servants that their position depended upon him. And last night, he said Mrs. Vale had served the family 30 years and deserved a seat at table. Clara said quietly. It was cruel, because he made it sound kind. The housekeeper's hands folded more tightly. I ate little. I returned to supervise the final course. The pear tart, said Voss again. This time Mrs. Vale looked directly at him. Her eyes were grey and tired, but not frightened. You repeat that as if you confess, sir. Many things confess, madam. Pastry more often than men. No one smiled. From somewhere below the stairs came the clatter of a dropped pan, followed by a servant's quick apology. The ordinary life of the house continued beneath murder, as it always does. Fires had to be fed, cups washed, boots brushed. Even grief required clean. Voss moved to the sideboard. There were 3 decanters, each labelled in silver. Port, brandy, Madeira. He lifted the brandy stopper and smelled it. Then he examined the cut glass neck, where a faint sticky line had dried beneath the lip, poured Sir Edmund's final glass. Thomas, said Mrs. Vale. On whose instruction? Sir Edmund's own. He always had brandy after dessert. And who brought the pear tart? I did. There was no tremor in her voice. That made it better and worse. Inspector Merritt watched with satisfaction. You see where this leads. I see where it wishes to lead, said Voss. That is not always the same road. He turned to the portrait of Lady Radcliffe. The painted woman looked past them all with an expression of patient sorrow. Beneath the frame, panelling, there was a tiny fresh scratch where the hook had been adjusted. Voss raised his pale blue ribbon. He tied a second knot. Lady Helena saw him do it. Another contradiction? No, he said. A courtesy from the dead. Nobody understood him, which appeared not to trouble him in the least. At the threshold, a young footman appeared, white-faced and breathing hard. His hair had been combed with water, and one hand was wrapped in a dishcloth spotted red. "Begging pardon, my lady," he said, looking everywhere except at the inspector. "There's a thing in Sir Edmund's locked desk. I didn't touch it properly. I only saw it when Mr. Merritt's man forced the drawer." Inspector Merritt turned. "What thing?" The footman swallowed. "A letter, sir, addressed to Mrs. Vale." Every eye in the room found the housekeeper. For the first time her expression changed. Not fear, recognition. Voss looked at her hand portrait, at the crossed-out place card, and at the tiny dried line on the brandy decanter. Then he slipped the knotted ribbon back into his pocket. "My friends," he said gently, "we have not yet begun." And Mrs. Vale stood firm through accusation, closed her eyes as if she had been waiting 12 years for those words. Chapter 2. The woman who sat below her station. The letter was not opened in the dining room. Lady Helena objected to that first, then to the footman's bleeding hand, then to the inspector's boots, then to the fact that the household had begun to whisper before breakfast had properly ended. Her grief wore the shape of management. It had drawers, keys, inventories. It could not endure anything loose. "We shall not make a theatre of my brother's desk," she said. "If there is a letter, Inspector, you will examine it in the study. Monsieur Voss may attend, since he has already been invited beyond the point of good sense." "Your generosity arrives wearing iron shoes," said Voss. Lady Helena looked at him with dislike. "And yours arrives dressed as insolence. Mine, madame, is merely curiosity with its hat removed." The study lay at the western end of the house, beyond a short corridor lined with hunting prints. It was a room built for possession. Dark shelves climbed to the ceiling. The leather chairs were cracked at the arms from Sir Edmund's elbows. A large desk faced the door, arranged with military neatness. Pen tray, blotter, calendar, letter knife, and a small brass bell polished to a soft glow. The curtains were half drawn, so the room held the dim amber light of a box where expensive things were kept from fading. Voss paused at the doorway. On the hearth lay the ashes from the previous night's fire, grey and soft except where Inspector Merritt's men had disturbed them. Scent remained in the room, not only smoke and paper, but something sweeter beneath it. Not flowers, not brandy, something like burned sugar at the bottom of a pan. "Do not touch the grate. I should not dream of improving your disorder," said Voss. The inspector opened the lower right drawer of the desk. Its lock had been forced, leaving splinters of mahogany curled outward like shaved chocolate. Inside lay a packet of household accounts, 3 sealed envelopes, small velvet case, and a folded letter addressed in Sir Edmund's angular. Mrs. Beatrice Vale. The housekeeper stood near the door. She had refused to sit. A woman who has spent 30 years anticipating other people's needs often finds her own body an incence. Her injured hand was not the bleeding one. The footman, Thomas Reed, had been sent below stairs with a sharp command from Lady Helen and a softer command from Clara, who had added that cook must wash the cut with boiled water. Voss noticed Clara's instruction. It was practical, immediate, given without asking. Then she remembered herself and became ill again. Inspector Merritt broke the seal. Mrs. Vale did not move. The skin around her mouth tightened. The inspector read aloud, "Beatrice, I have decided that our old arrangement must end. Dinner tonight. I shall speak plainly for them all. You have been paid enough for silence. If you have any dignity left, you will accept what follows without a scene. E.R." Lady Helena gave a sharp breath through her nose. "What does that mean?" No one answered at once. Cresswell had come in behind them, and now looked intensely at the carpet. Solicitors do, when a dead man's indecency begins to leak through proper paper. Reverend Pike murmured something about mercy, but the words seemed to comfort only himself. Captain Harrow leaned against the bookcase with the controlled interest of a man relieved that suspicion had turned its face elsewhere. Mrs. Vale held out her hand. "That letter is mine." Merritt folded it once, not twice. "It is evidence." "It is mine," she repeated. "He wrote my name upon it." "Dead men write many things," said the inspector. "Living officers decide what becomes of." Voss looked at the letter from Mrs. Vale. "Did you know of this arrangement?" Her gaze found him. "I knew of many arrangements. Houses of this age are built on." "Madame, that is a roof, not an answer." She looked away. "Sir Edmund gave me money each quarter. It entered nowhere. He said it was for loyalty. Lady Helena's face hardened so quickly it seemed to lose blood. "My brother paid you secretly. He paid me openly enough when he chose to humiliate," said Mrs. Vale. "Secretly when he chose to remember why." The room shifted around that sentence. Clara's fingers went to her throat. Captain Harrow lowered his eyes. Reverend Pike pressed his lips together with pious pain. Cresswell became very interested in the silver cap of his fountain pen. Voss stood beside the desk, patient and exact. He did not rescue Mrs. Vale from the silence. Some silences are not gaps. They are instruments. Lady Helena broke first. "You will explain yourself." Mrs. Vale gave a faint, bitter smile. "After 30 years, my lady. The explanation seems a little late." Clara stepped forward. "Mrs. Vale, please. Uncle was cruel. He cannot hurt you now unless we go on helping. Tell us what he meant." The housekeeper looked at Clara then, and some private tenderness passed over her plain face. It vanished almost at once. "Your uncle did not always behave as a gentleman," she said. "That is all I will say in this room." Captain Harrow gave a low whistle. "By God, Sir Edmund kept a housekeeper's secret and paid for it. That sounds rather like a motive, Inspector." Clara turned on Julian. "Do not make yourself smaller than you are. It does not suit you, and it does not help me." His expression. "I am trying to protect you from scandal, Clara. Your uncle's name is still your name, whatever he deserves. You always say protection when you mean control." The words landed with more history than volume. Harrow's hand tightened over the silver head of his cane. He had expected gratitude and found judgment instead. That, Voss thought, often when handsome men became dangerous. Not when they were refused love, but when love stopped admiring. Inspector Merritt tapped the letter. "Mrs. Vale, where were you between 8:50 and 9:10? "In the dining room and passage. Brought the tart. I brought the tart. You supervised the brandy. Thomas poured it under my eye. You had just been threatened with exposure. I have been threatened many times, and this time he meant it." Mrs. Vale looked at him without blinking. "Inspector, men like Sir Edmund always mean it at the moment. Then they discover a better use for cruelty. Tomorrow." Voss walked to the mantel. Above it hung a small watercolour of Radcliffe Manor in summer, all green lawns and obedient roses. Beneath the watercolour stood a row of objects placed with sentimental care. A child's silver rattle, cracked porcelain dog, a miniature frame containing a lock of fair hair tied with faded blue thread. He lifted his own ribbon from his pocket and regarded the thread in the frame. "Who was the child?" he asked. Lady Helena stiffened. "That is not relevant." "Almost certainly, then, it is." Cresswell spoke carefully. "Lady Radcliffe bore a son before Miss Clara came into Sir Edmund's care. The child died in infancy." "Name?" "Michael," said Clara softly. "Aunt Margaret never recovered. Uncle had his things kept here after she died." Voss looked at Mrs. Vale. Her face had become unreadable, but unreadable is not empty. It is often crowded. "Did you know the child?" he asked. "I knew every child in this house," she said. "That is not quite an answer either. I have given you the kind I can bear." Inspector Merritt made a note. "Bear or invent, Mrs. Vale turned toward him. "You may suspect me of murder. Do not accuse me of imagination. Servants cannot afford much of that." Voss almost smiled. He moved to the desk again and examined the brass bell. He did not ring it. Instead, he looked beneath its rim, where a faint crescent of dark residue clung near the handle. Then he inspected the blotter. It held the ghost of heavy writing, indented lines so pressed into the leather surface. He tilted it toward the light. "Inspector, may I trouble you for a soft pencil?" Merritt gave him one with reluctance sharpened into a gesture. Voss placed a thin sheet of paper over the blotter and rubbed lightly. Words in fragments, broken by pressure and angle. "Not my blood. Before the bell, tell her." Clara made a sound as if she had been struck. Lady Helena whispered. "Disgraceful." Reverend Pike shut his eyes. "There are sins that continue after burial." Voss turned his head. "There are also sins buried alive, Reverend. They are noisier." The vicar opened his eyes and looked at Voss with sudden fear, too quick to hide completely. "I speak only as a priest. No one speaks only as anything." That earned another knot in the pale blue ribbon. Voss tied it slowly while the others watched. He seemed less a detective than a man marking the rhythm of falsehood in silk. At that moment, door opened without a knock. Cook stood there, red-faced, flower on one sleeve, her cap tilted like a defeated flag. "My lady, begging your pardon for coming up. But Thomas is saying wicked nonsense in the servants' hall." And I won't have it said below stairs first, when upstairs we'll only pretend not to hear it. Lady Helena closed her eyes. Mrs. Ansell, choose your next sentence with care. Cook pointed one thick finger toward the passage. Thomas says Sir Edmund changed the seating cards himself, he says. Mrs. Vale was meant to sit beside him, not at the far end, he says. Someone crossed out her card after the master went upstairs to dress. The room seemed to draw inward. Mrs. Vale looked at the floor. Voss looked at the letter. Inspector Merritt looked pleased, because policemen are sometimes happiest when facts become uglier in a useful direction. And who crossed it out? He asked. Cook's mouth trembled. That is what the boy won't say, sir. He says he saw the hand, but not the face. Only the ring. Lady Helena's pearl quivered at her throat. Captain Harrow shifted his cane. Cresswell turned sharply toward the window. Reverend Pike folded his hands so tightly the knuckles whitened. Voss, however, looked at Clara Radcliffe. On her right hand, where a ring might have been, there remained a pale mark in the shape of absence. She saw him see it, and before anyone could ask the next question, Clara whispered, I did not cross out the card because I hated her. Voss inclined his head with grave courtesy. No, he said. You crossed it out because you were afraid of what kindness might... Chapter 3. What the dessert remembered, the kitchen at Radcliffe Manor was not a room that encouraged confession. It encouraged work, heat, gathered beneath the low beams, and pressed downward like a hand. Copper pans hung in strict ranks above the central table, polished bellies catching the firelight in soft, distorted reflection. A long wooden board bore the marks of years of chopping, grooves that held the faint smell of onions, herbs, and something sweeter beneath, as if sugar had once been spilled and never entirely forgiven. Voss stood just inside the threshold and did not step farther until Mrs. Ansell had noticed him. People speak differently when they believe themselves alone. Kitchens are the truest witnesses in a house because they are never empty for long. Mrs. Ansell was kneading dough with unnecessary else force. Each movement carried a small indignation. Thomas Reed sat on a stool near the scullery door, bandaged hand held out before him like an accusation he could not quite put into words. He was young, too young to have learned that truth must sometimes be arraigned before it can be spoken. You will forgive the intrusion, Voss said, removing his gloves and folding them with care. I wish to see where the final course became itself. Cook wiped her hands on her apron and gave a short nod. You'll find no poison here, sir. I'd sooner poison myself than a guest at my table. Hospitality is a form of pride, said Voss. It is often more dangerous than... Thomas looked up at him, startled. Dangerous, sir? When a person takes pride in doing a thing well, they will notice when it is done badly. That is when truth begins to appear. Cook snorted. Truth doesn't pay for flour, sir. But it does ruin reputations, so I suppose it has its uses. Voss approached the long table where the remains of the pear tart sat, beneath a cloth. He lifted the cloth without asking permission. Tart had been cut unevenly. One slice was smaller than the others, not by accident, but by hesitation. The crust had been browned carefully, not deeply. The glaze on the pears caught the light in thin, sticky layers. He leaned slightly closer. There is cinnamon, he said, but less than usual. Cook frowned. You taste from the air now? I listened to it, said Voss. Did you change the recipe? No, sir. The same as always, but not prepared by the same hands. Thomas shifted on his stool. Mrs. Vale finished the glaze, sir. Cook had to step away when the roast began to catch. I saw her. Mrs. Ansell gave him a sharp look. There was no harm in that, Mrs. Vale has done it before. Of course, said Voss. It is a simple task if one is accustomed to it. One must heat the sugar just enough to coat, not enough to burn. He reached out and touched the edge of the crust with one fingertip, then brought it briefly to his tongue. The gesture was precise, almost delicate. Then he turned his head slightly, as if listening again. There is a bitterness, he said. Inspector Merritt, who had followed reluctantly into the kitchen, folded his arms. We know that already. The doctor smelled it in the glass. Yes, said Voss, but the glass only confirms what the tart remembers. Cook's face hardened. Are you saying I poisoned him through pastry? I am saying, Voss replied, that poison rarely travels alone. It leaves traces of its journey in the things it touches, and in the hands that guide it. Mrs. Vale stood in the doorway behind them. No one had heard her enter. Then perhaps you should examine my hands, she said. Her voice was steady. It did not plead, it did not defend. It offered itself as one might offer a tool, useful but not personal. Voss turned to her. He did not step closer. "May I?" She extended her hand. They were broad, capable hands, marked by years of work. The skin at the fingertips was slightly rough, the nails trimmed short and clean. There were faint stains along the side of her right index finger, darkened, almost invisible unless one knew to look. Voss leaned in. "Sugar," he said, burned slightly, "and something else." Mrs. Vale withdrew her hand. "You will not find what you wish there, Monsieur Voss." "I rarely find what I wish for. I found what remained." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "That's enough of this. Mrs. Vale, you admit you handled the tart. You were threatened with exposure. You had the opportunity. And if I had wished him dead," she interrupted quietly, "would not have chosen a method that left me standing over him when he took his last breath." The simplicity of that statement altered the air in the kitchen. Thomas looked at her with something like belief. Cook crossed herself without thinking. Inspector Merritt hesitated, not because he was convinced, but because certainty had become less convenient. Voss walked slowly to the stove. A small pan sat at the back, its contents hardened into a thin, dark layer. He lifted it, tilted it toward the light. "Was this used for the glaze?" he asked. Cook nodded. "Yes, sir. And who cleaned it?" "I did not yet have the time." "Good," said Voss softly. He set the pan down and turned to Thomas. "You said you saw a hand crossing out the card," he said. "Tell me exactly what you saw. Not what you think it meant, only what you saw." Thomas swallowed. "I was setting the last place, sir. The master had gone upstairs. The others were in the drawing room. I came back for the salt. I saw a hand reach over the table and take Mrs. Vale's card. It crossed it out, like this." He mimed the motion with his bandaged hand. "Quick, like it had been decided already. And the ring? It was a dark stone, sir, not bright like diamonds, and the setting was heavy. I remember that because it made a small sound on the card when the hand moved." Voss's eyes moved briefly to Captain Harrow's absent ring, to Lady Helena's pearls, to Clara's bare finger, to Reverend Pike's plain band. Then he said, "And the hand itself?" Thomas hesitated. "It was not a lady's hand, sir. Not soft, but not rough like mine either. It was careful." "Careful," Voss repeated. He took out his ribbon and added another knot. Captain Harrow had entered the kitchen during the exchange. He leaned against the door frame now, watching with narrowed eyes. "This is absurd," he said. "We are discussing pastry and rings while a man lies dead upstairs." "Yes," said Voss, "because the dead man has already spoken. It is the living who continue to confuse matters." Harrow stepped forward. "If you have something to accuse me of, say it plainly. Do not circle me with riddles." "I accuse you of impatience," said Voss. "It is a common weakness. It leads men to act before they understand." "Do you understand?" "Very little," Voss replied. "But I understand that Sir Edmund intended to reveal something at dinner, that Mrs. Vale feared that revelation, that Miss Clara altered the seating, and that someone with a careful hand wished to restore it." Clara's voice came from the corridor. "I did not alter it out of cruelty." They turned. She stood there, pale but composed, her hands no longer twisting the handkerchief. Something had settled in her, perhaps not courage, but the exhaustion that sometimes resembled. "I crossed out Mrs. Vale's card because I could not bear to see Uncle humiliate her in front of everyone," she said. "He would have made it into a spectacle. He always did." Mrs. Vale looked at her, and for a moment something like gratitude flickered across her face. "And yet," Voss said gently, "the card was restored." Clara nodded. "Yes, I saw it later. I thought Uncle had noticed and undone my interference." "But you did not see him do it?" "No. Did you see anyone else near the table?" She hesitated. Captain Harrow watched her closely. Reverend Pike followed silently behind, looked at the floor. Clara's voice dropped. "I saw the Reverend in the corridor." The vicar looked up sharply. "Miss Radcliffe." "I did not think anything of it at the time," she said quickly. "You said you were looking for Sir Edmund. I assumed he had called for—" Reverend Pike clasped his hands. "He had asked me to speak with you." "Yes, that is not unusual. A man of his age considers his soul from time to time." Voss regarded him. "And did he consider it last night?" The vicar's expression wavered. "He intended to confess something." "Before the bell?" said Voss softly. The words seemed to strike the room. Reverend Pike closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "Confess what?" The vicar opened his eyes again. They were no longer mild. "He did not say," he replied, but he told me it was a grave mistake done many years ago. He said he could not carry it any longer. Voss's gaze moved slowly from the vicar to Mrs. Vale. "And you believed him?" he asked. The vicar hesitated. "I believed he wished to be believed. That is not the same thing." "No," said Reverend Pike quietly. "It is not." The kitchen had grown very still. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a bell began to ring, thin, metallic, insistent. Not the house bell, the chapel bell. It struck once, twice, 3 times. Voss listened. Then he said, almost to himself, "He wrote before the bell. But bells do not belong to one place. They belong to time." Inspector Merritt frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," said Voss, "that Sir Edmund's last intention was not directed at dinner." He turned toward the door. "It was directed at something that happens every day at the same hour, whether men live or die." Clara whispered, "The chapel." Voss inclined his head. "Yes," he said, "and if we are to understand what was meant to be told, then we must go where it was meant to be heard." Mrs. Vale closed her eyes again, not in fear, in memory, and this time, when she opened them, she did not look at the floor. She looked directly at the chapel door beyond the corridor, as if she had known, all along, that the truth had never been meant for the table. Chapter 4. The bell that was not, for dinner. The chapel at Radcliffe Manor had been built to persuade rather than to comfort. It stood apart from the main house, connected by a narrow stone passage whose walls held cold even at midday. The floor was worn into shallow hollows where generations of footsteps had chosen the same path without thinking. Along the passage hung a row of small iron hooks once used for cloaks, now empty, except for a single black shawl that no one claimed, paused beneath it. "Who left this here?" he asked. Mrs. Vale, who had followed without being asked, spoke quietly. "Belonged to Lady Radcliffe. She wore it in winter. No one has moved it since she died." "Then someone has chosen not to forget," Voss said. Lady Helena, walking ahead, did not turn. "Sentiment is not evidence." "On the contrary," he replied, "is often the only evidence people cannot destroy." The bell continued to sound, steady, unhurried. It was not an alarm. It was a summons that expected obedience. Inside, the chapel was smaller than one would expect from the size of the estate. It had been built for a family, not a congregation. Dark wooden pews lined either side of a narrow aisle. The air smelled faintly of wax and stone, a trace of something older beneath, dust that had settled long ago and never quite agreed to leave. At the far end stood the altar, simple and unadorned except for 2 brass candlesticks and a small wooden cross. Behind it, a stained glass window filtered the autumn light into muted reds and blues that lay across the floor like faded cloth. Pike moved ahead of the others and approached the altar with practiced familiarity. He did not kneel. He rested his hands lightly on the wood, as though asking it to steady him. "This is where Sir Edmund wished to speak," he said. "He told me he would come after dinner, before the night bell. I waited. He did not arrive." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "And you did not think that was unusual?" "I thought it entirely in keeping with his character," the vicar replied. "He enjoyed making others wait for absolution, as he did for kindness." Captain Harrow gave a short, humourless laugh. "A charming man to the end." Clara moved slowly down the aisle, her fingers brushing the edge of each pew as she passed. She stopped halfway and looked back. "I remember sitting here as a child," she said. "Uncle never came. He said prayer was a private matter, and he disliked public displays of humility." "Humility requires an audience for men like him," said Voss. He did not go to the altar. Instead, he turned toward the side wall, where a small door stood half hidden behind a carved wooden screen. It was the sort of door one might overlook, unless one had reason to suspect that what is hidden is rarely accidental. "What lies beyond?" Reverend Pike hesitated. "A vestry. Storage. There is nothing of interest there." "Nothing of interest," Voss repeated, "is often the most interesting thing in a house built upon memory." He moved toward the door. Lady Helena spoke sharply. "You will not pry into every corner of this estate, as though it were a curiosity shop. I would never insult your house in such a way," Voss said calmly. "A curiosity shop displays what it wishes to sell. A house like this hides what it cannot afford to lose." He opened the door. The vestry was narrow, shelves lining one wall and a small table beneath a single window. The light here was colder, less forgiving. On the shelves lay folded vestments, old hymn books, and a collection of boxes labelled in careful handwriting. Voss stepped inside. On the table lay a ledger. It was not new. The leather cover had softened with use. The corners showed the faint rounding that comes from handling. A pen rested beside it, uncapped, as if someone had intended to return. Voss did not touch the ledger immediately. He looked instead at the dust on the table. There were 2 sets of marks, one older, settled evenly across the surface. The other recently disturbed in a narrow path, leading from the ledger to the edge of the table and stopping abruptly. "Inspector," he said, "who has been here since last night?" "No one," Merritt replied. "We secured the chapel after the initial search. Only the vicar has access." Reverend Pike stiffened. "I have not entered since yesterday." "And yesterday evening," Voss said. "You were expecting Sir Edmund?" "Yes." "And you waited?" "Yes." "When he did not come, you left?" The vicar nodded. Voss stepped closer to the table and opened the ledger. The pages were filled with entries, dates, names, notes written in a steady, disciplined hand. It was not a church record. It was too personal for that. Each entry seemed to mark not events, but confessions, private conversations reduced to brief, careful summary. Clara leaned forward. "What is it?" "Memory," Voss said. "Written by someone who feared forgetting." He turned a page. Then another. His expression did not change, but his fingers paused for a fraction of a second longer than before. "Read it," Inspector Merritt said impatiently. Voss shook his head. "Not yet." Captain Harrow stepped into the vestry. "If that book contains evidence, it should be examined immediately." "It contains something more dangerous than evidence," Voss replied. "It contains intention." Harrow frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means that whoever wrote this did not merely record the past. They prepared for the future." He closed the ledger gently. Mrs. Vale had entered the doorway. She did not step inside. "You have found it," she said. It was not a question. Voss turned to her. "You knew it was here." "I knew it existed." "And its contents?" She hesitated. "I knew enough to fear them." Lady Helena's voice cut through the room. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Vale did not look at her. "Your brother did not pay me for silence about a single act. He paid me to remain silent about a pattern." The word lingered. "Pattern is more dangerous than a mistake. A mistake can be forgiven. A pattern must be explained." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "You suggesting Sir Edmund had a history of—" "I am suggesting nothing," Mrs. Vale said. "I am remembering." Clara's face had gone pale again. "Mrs. Vale, what did he do?" The housekeeper's gaze moved to the stained glass window, where the light had shifted slightly, deepening the red tone. "He took what did not belong to him," she said quietly, "and he believed that payment made it his." No one spoke. Reverend Pike's hands trembled slightly on the back of a chair. Captain Harrow looked away. Cresswell, who had followed more slowly, removed his glasses and polished them with unnecessary care. Lady Helena stood very still. "My brother," she said, "was not a criminal." "No," Voss replied. "He was something more complicated. He was a man who believed that his position exempted from consequence." He stepped out of the vestry and into the chapel proper. "The letter," he said, "the note in the grate, the ledger, they all point to the same intention. Sir Edmund meant to reveal something before the bell." "And he died before he could," Merritt said. "Yes," Voss agreed. "But he also wrote 'not my blood.'" Clara looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," Voss said, "that whatever he intended to confess did not concern his own actions alone." Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. Reverend Pike spoke, his voice strained. "There are things that should remain buried." "Burial," Voss said, "is a form of preservation." Inspector Merritt frowned. "You are speaking in circles again." "I am speaking precisely," Voss replied. Sir Edmund did not fear exposure of his own guilt. He feared the exposure of something that would implicate another. Captain Harrow stepped forward. "And you think that person killed him to prevent it?" "I think," said Voss, "that fear is rarely patient." He moved slowly down the aisle, his gaze passing over each of them in turn. "Last night," he continued, "someone altered the seating, someone restored it, someone prepared the final course. Someone ensured that Sir Edmund would not reach this chapel." "And you believe those are 3 different people?" Merritt asked. Voss paused. Then very softly, he said, "No." The words settled heavily. Clara shook her head. "That makes no sense." "Makes perfect sense," Voss replied. "If one understands that the crime was not planned as a single act." Mrs. Vale opened her eyes and looked at him. "You are close," she said. "Close is a dangerous distance," he answered. "It is where people begin to act before they have understood." The bell stopped ringing. The silence that followed was not empty, full of everything the bell had interrupted. Thoughts, fears, memories that had been waiting for sound to justify their delay. Voss reached into his pocket and drew out the pale blue ribbon. He studied the knots. Then he tied another. "This," he said, "is not a murder that began last night." He looked toward the vestry, toward the ledger, toward the past that had been written down and hidden away. "It began many years ago," he continued, "when someone chose silence over truth." Mrs. Vale's voice was almost a whisper. "And now?" Voss met her gaze. "Now," he said, "someone has chosen the truth too late to save a life, but not too late to reveal it." Clara took a step back. Captain Harrow's grip tightened on his cane. Reverend Pike lowered his head. Lady Helena did not move at all. Inspector Merritt looked from one face to another, frustration beginning to show. "Then say it plainly," he demanded. "Who killed Sir Edmund?" Voss did not answer. Instead, he turned toward the chapel door. "Inspector," he said, "before we accuse, we must understand what was meant to be confessed. And that is in the ledger, in part. And the rest—" Voss paused at the threshold. Then he said, very quietly, "The rest is written in the way each of you has chosen to remember." He stepped into the passage. Behind him, in the chapel, the light shifted again. And, for a brief moment, the stained glass cast a shadow across the altar that looked not like a cross, but like a divided line, as if something that had once been whole had been broken cleanly in two. Chapter 5, the accounts. No one kept. The ledger was brought back to the study, not because it belonged there, because that was where Sir Edmund had believed control resided. Rooms have reputation, and men like him depend upon them. Voss placed the book on the desk, with a care that suggested respect, though not for its former owner. Inspector Merritt stood close enough to see, close enough to touch. Lady Helena remained upright, where the light sharpened her features into something almost architectural. Clara chose the smaller chair near the hearth, and sat with her hands folded, as if attending a lesson she had not wished to learn. Captain Harrow kept his distance, leaning against the bookshelves in a posture of casual disinterest that required visible effort. Reverend Pike stood nearest the door, his position offering both escape and witness. Mrs. Vale did not sit at all. "Shall we begin?" Merritt said. "We have already begun," Voss replied. "We are merely choosing the order in which to understand." He opened the ledger. The handwriting was not Sir Edmund's. It was steadier, more patient, less concerned with authority, and more concerned with accuracy. The entries were brief but deliberate. Names were rarely written in full. Dates appeared frequent. Each page carried the quiet weight of something remembered against the will. Voss turned to a marked section near the middle. He did not read aloud immediately. Instead, he looked at Reverend Pike. "This is your work," he said. The vicar did not deny it. His shoulders lowered slightly, as though something long carried had chosen its moment to be set down. "I recorded confession," Pike said. "Not formally, not for the church. For myself. Some things cannot be absolved unless they are remembered properly." "Remembered by whom?" asked Voss. "By someone who will not pretend they never happened." Lady Helena's voice was sharp. "This is intolerable. You kept records of private confessions in my brother's house. I kept records of truths that would otherwise be buried by convenience." Pike replied quietly. "Your brother encouraged forgetting. I did not. And you consider that you're right. I consider it my duty." Voss turned a page. "Let us test that," he said. He read aloud. "June 12th. She came again. Not to confess, only to confirm what I already knew." He had arranged it. Money exchanged hands. Silence agreed. "She said she would endure it for the sake of the child." Clara's breath. Captain Harrow looked up sharply. Mrs. Vale's expression did not change, but her eyes closed for a fraction longer than a blink. Inspector Merritt leaned forward. "Who is she?" Voss did not answer. He turned another page. September 3rd. The arrangement continues. He insists it is kindness. She does not contradict him. I begin to understand that silence is not consent, but it can be mistaken for it. Lady Helena spoke again, more slowly now. "You are reading fragments. Without names they prove nothing. They prove a pattern," Voss said, "or they prove your willingness to interpret them as such." Voss inclined his head slightly. "That is always the risk with truth. It depends upon who is willing to hear it." He turned to Mrs. Vale. "You knew of this ledger," he said. "Did you know it contained your story?" She met his gaze. "I knew it contained someone's. That is not the same." "No," she agreed. "It is not." Inspector Merritt tapped the desk impatiently. "We are circling again. This may explain motive, but it does not explain method. Sir Edmund was poisoned. Someone administered it. That is the crime I am concerned with. Voss looked at him. Inspector, you are concerned with the moment a man dies, he said. I am concerned with the years that made it possible. Which of those years placed poison in his glass? That, said Voss, is precisely what we must determine. He closed the ledger, not abruptly, not with finality, with restraint. Then he moved to the mantel and lifted the small brass bell. Everyone watched him. He did not ring it. He turned it in his hand, examining the underside. Sir Edmund used this bell to summon his servants, he said. He used it often, was an extension of his voice. So, Voss replied. It is curious that he did not use it last night. Clara looked up. Do you mean? He collapsed after dessert. There was time, brief but sufficient, to signal distress. Yet the bell remained untouched. Perhaps he could not reach it, Harrow suggested. Perhaps, Voss said. Or perhaps he chose not to. That is absurd, Merritt said. A man in pain does not choose silence. No, Voss agreed. A man in fear does. The room stilled. Mrs. Vale's hands tightened. Voss set the bell down. Let us consider the sequence, he continued. The tart is served. The brandy is poured. Sir Edmund begins to feel the effects. He writes a note. Before the bell, tell her. He places it in the grate. He does not ring for help. And your conclusion? Merritt pressed. My conclusion, Voss said, is that the poison was not a surprise. Clara shook her head. That makes no sense. Why would he drink it knowingly? Because he did not believe it would harm him, Voss replied. Silence followed. Captain Harrow straightened. You are suggesting he was accustomed to taking something? Yes. And that someone changed it? Mrs. Vale spoke, her voice low. He took a tonic. All eyes turned to her. Each evening, she continued, after dinner, a small measure. He said it aided digestion. Inspector Merritt frowned. What kind of tonic? I do not know. It was kept in a small bottle in his study. He did not allow anyone to handle it. Voss's gaze sharpened slightly. And last night? I did not see him take it, he said. But I saw the bottle earlier in the day. Where? On the desk. Voss looked at the desk, then at the drawer that had been forced open, then at the ledger. He took out his ribbon and added another knot. Inspector, he said, may I see the bottle? Merritt gestured to a constable waiting outside. Within moments, a small glass vial was brought in and placed on the desk. It was nearly empty. Voss did not touch it immediately. He leaned closer, studying the residue along the inside. Then he lifted it carefully and held it to the light. There is a difference, he said. What difference? Merritt asked. The colour, Voss replied. It is slightly darker near the base, though something has settled. Are you saying it was tampered with? I am saying it was altered. Captain Harrow stepped forward. Then whoever did it had access to the study. Or access to the man, Voss said. Clara's voice trembled. Uncle trusted no one. Everyone trusts someone, Voss replied. The question is whether that trust is deserved. Reverend Pike spoke, his voice strained. He trusted me. Voss turned to him. You were with him before dinner? Yes. And after? No. Did he mention the tonic? The vicar hesitated. Then he said, he mentioned many things, not that. Voss watched him for a long moment. Then he nodded, as though something had confirmed itself. Of course, he said softly. Inspector Merritt looked between them. What? Voss set the vial down. The poison was not placed in the tart, he said, nor in the brandy. Then where in the one thing Sir Edmund would consume without suspicion? The room seemed to lean toward him. The tonic, Clara whispered. Yes, said Voss. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes again. Captain Harrow exhaled sharply. Then the person who altered it had to be someone he trusted completely, or someone he believed he controlled, Voss said. Inspector Merritt nodded. That still leaves several possibilities. Yes, Voss agreed, but fewer than before. He moved back to the ledger. Then he said very quietly, this was not a crime of opportunity. He looked at each of them in turn. It was a crime of history. Clara's voice was barely audible. History belongs to all of us. Voss inclined his head. Precisely. He closed the ledger again, and this time the sound of it seemed louder than before, as though something within it had decided not to remain silent any longer. Chapter 6. The name that was never written. The study did not grow quieter when the ledger closed. It grew sharper. Silence, when it carries meaning, is not empty. It becomes a surface upon which every small movement leaves a mark. Clara shifted in her chair. Captain Harrow adjusted his cuff. Reverend Pike lowered his eyes to the floorboards as though the grain might rearrange itself into something merciful. Mrs. Vale remained still. but her stillness had changed. It was no longer defensive, it was anticipatory. Voss stood at the desk, one hand resting lightly on the closed ledger. "There is a name that does not appear in this book," he said. Inspector Merritt frowned. "How can you know that without reading it fully?" "Because it is the name the book is avoiding," Voss replied. "Absence is a kind of presence, Inspector. It requires intention." Helena's voice cut through the room. "This is becoming tiresome. If you have an accusation, you will make it. If not, you will refrain from speaking in riddles." "I will do neither," Voss said calmly. "I will observe." He turned toward Mrs. Vale. "You said Sir Edmund paid you for silence," he said. "Not once." "Repeatedly. And that suggests continuity. A single act does not require maintenance. Pattern does." She met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, and the child mentioned in the ledger, the one for whom silence was endured." Clara leaned forward. "What child?" Mrs. Vale did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the mantel, toward the small silver rattle, and the lock of fair hair tied with blue thread. "Not that child," she said at last. The words landed with quiet force. Voss nodded once, as though confirming something already suspected. "Then there was another," he said. Lady Helena stiffened. "This is absurd." "Is it?" Voss asked gently. "A man with power, a servant with no means to refuse, a payment repeated over years, a ledger recording arrangements. These are not the ingredients of absurdity. They are the ingredients of inevitability." Clara's face had gone very still. "Mrs. Vale, is this true?" The housekeeper looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes." The word did not tremble. Captain Harrow swore under his breath. "Good God!" Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "And this child, where is he now?" Mrs. Vale's eyes flickered just once. "Voss saw it. Not dead," he said softly. "No," she replied. "Not acknowledged. No, not forgotten." A pause. Then never. The room seemed to tilt slightly, though the parts of it had shifted. Clara spoke again, her voice steadier now, though it carried something harder beneath. "Who is he?" Mrs. Vale did not answer. Instead, Reverend Pike did. "He came to me," the vicar said quietly, "years ago, not as a child, as a young man. He asked questions I could not answer without betraying confidence. He did not press me. He did not need to." Captain Harrow turned sharply. "You knew of him?" "I knew of his existence," Pike replied. "Not his place." "And you said nothing?" "I am not in the habit of announcing the private suffering of others." "That suffering now includes murder," Merritt said. Voss raised a hand slightly. "Let us not hurry past understanding," he said. "We have established that Sir Edmund maintained a long-standing arrangement with Mrs. Vale. That arrangement involved a child. That child survived. That child, at some point, sought knowledge of his origin." "And you think he killed Sir Edmund?" Merritt said. "I think," Voss replied, "that he had reason to." Clara shook her head. "But why now? Why after all these years?" Voss looked at the ledger. "Because Sir Edmund intended to speak," he said. "To reveal what had been hidden, not out of remorse, but out of control. He wished to dictate the terms of the truth." Mrs. Vale's voice was low. "He always did. And that," Voss continued, "would have destroyed the only protection the child had." Inspector Merritt nodded slowly. "Anonymity?" "Yes." Captain Harrow crossed his arms. "The son kills the father to preserve his own name. That is a rather classical arrangement." "Too classical," Voss said, "which makes it suspect." Harrow frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Voss replied, "that is the explanation everyone wishes to believe." "Because it fits," Merritt said. "Because it is convenient," Voss corrected. "It allows us to place the crime outside this room, to assign it to a figure who is absent, unknown, and therefore incapable of contradicting." Clara looked at him sharply. "You do not believe the son is the killer?" "I believe," Voss said, "that the son is central to the truth. But being central is not the same as being responsible." He moved away from the desk and toward the window. Outside, the ground stretched into the fading afternoon. The fountain stood still. The small ivory-handled knife remained on its rim, catching the light in a thin, pale line. Voss's gaze lingered on it. Then he said, almost to himself, "The first object was not placed for use, placed for meaning." Inspector Merritt followed his line of sight. "The knife?" "Yes. What does it mean?" "Someone wished to begin a story," Voss replied. "Not to end one." He turned back to the room. "Consider the sequence again," he said. "The seating card is altered, then restored. The tart is prepared. The tonic is altered. The letter is written. The ledger is left accessible. The chapel is prepared for a confession." "That is not a single act," Clara said slowly. No, Voss agreed. It is a convergence. Captain Harrow frowned. Of what? Of intentions, Voss said. Different people, different motives, intersecting at the same moment. Inspector Merritt exhaled. You are saying more than one person contributed to the death. I am saying, Voss replied, more than one person believed they were acting for the right reason. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. Reverend Pike looked at her. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. Lady Helena remained still, but her gaze had sharpened. Captain Harrow shifted his weight, cane tapping once against the floor. Each of them, Voss thought, had made a decision. Not all of those decisions were fatal, but, together, he reached into his pocket and drew out the pale blue ribbon. He studied the knots. Then he untied one. Inspector Merritt noticed. You remove a contradiction. I remove an error, Voss said. Which one? The assumption that the crime was to a single will. He looked at Mrs. Vale. You did not poison him, he said. She opened her eyes. No, she replied. Inspector Merritt frowned. But she handled the tart. Tart was not the instrument, Voss said. It was the stage. Captain Harrow leaned forward. Then who altered the tonic? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the mantel again and picked up the small frame containing the lock of hair. He held it lightly. Memory, he said, is not passive. It acts. It shapes decision. It creates obligations that outlast reason. He set the frame down. Then he turned to Clara. You crossed out the card to prevent humiliation, he said. Yes. You believed you were protecting Mrs. Vale. Yes. But you also prevented Sir Edmund from controlling the moment of his revelation. Clara hesitated. I suppose so. That matters, Voss said. He turned to Reverend Pike. You recorded the past, he said. You preserved what others wished to forget. Yes. You also knew that Sir Edmund intended to speak. Yes. And you did not intervene. Vicar's voice was quiet. I believed confession was his right. And his consequence, Voss said. He turned to Captain Harrow. You had reason to resent Sir Edmund, he said. Your engagement was broken. Your debts are exposed. Harrow's jaw tightened. Yes. And yet you remained. I had nowhere else to go, he replied. Or something else to gain. Harrow did not answer. Finally, Voss turned to Lady. You protected your brother's reputation, he said. You managed his household, his image, his legacy. Protected what was mine to protect, she replied. And what was not? Her gaze did not waver. That was never my concern. Voss nodded slowly. Then he said very quietly, and yet you are the only one who did not act last night. The words hung in the air. Lady Helena's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted. Inspector Merritt looked at her sharply. Clara stared. Captain Harrow straightened. Reverend Pike held his breath. Mrs. Vale did not move. Voss stepped back. The crime, he said, is not complete. Merritt blinked. What? Death has occurred, Voss said, but the truth has not yet reached its conclusion. He looked toward the door. Because the one person we have not yet heard from, he paused, then finished very softly, is the one whose life depended on silence. Clara's voice was barely audible. The son. Voss inclined his head. Yes, Inspector Merritt frowned. And where is he? Voss's gaze moved once more, to the window, to the fountain, to the ivory-handled knife resting in plain sight. Then he said, He has already arrived. The room seemed to stop breathing. Captain Harrow's cane struck the floor once, sharply. Clara rose halfway from her chair. Mrs. Vale's hands tightened. Reverend Pike whispered something under his breath. Lady Helena remained perfectly still, and Voss, watching them all, added quietly, He has been here long enough to decide what kind of man he wishes to be. Chapter 7. The man who was not introduced. The announcement did not produce chaos. It produced recognition. That was what struck Voss most clearly. Not shock, not denial, but a subtle tightening across the room, as though each person had already rehearsed the possibility, and was now adjusting to its presence. Truth rarely arrives unimagined. It arrives as something feared, delayed, and finally acknowledged. Inspector Merritt was the first to speak. This is no longer a puzzle, he said. If the man is here, we will identify him. A fixed number of individuals in this house. One of them does not belong to the name he carries. Captain Harrow gave a sharp, restless laugh. And how do you propose we test that, Inspector? Shall we line up and ask each other whose father we might secretly be? Mockery is often the last refuge of the uncertain, Voss said mildly. Harrow's jaw tightened. Cryptic remarks are the refuge of men who enjoy hearing themselves admired. I do not require admiration, Voss replied. Only attention. Clara rose fully now. The movement cost her something. Courage, perhaps, or simply the exhaustion of holding still too long. If he is here, she said, then we must speak plainly. This is not a matter of reputation any longer. It is a matter of truth. Lady Helena turned toward her. You speak as though truth were an uncomplicated virtue. It is not. It is a tool. And like all tools, it must be used with judgment. Clara met her gaze. Uncle used it to control people. I will not. That is because you have never had to manage consequences, Lady Helena replied. Then I will learn. There was no defiance in Clara's voice, only resolution. It made the statement more dangerous. Voss observed her closely. Growth, he thought, often begins in precisely such moments. Not with certainty, but with refusal. Inspector Merritt stepped forward. Enough of this. We will proceed methodically. Each person will account for their movements last night. Any inconsistency will be examined. You will find many inconsistencies, Voss said, but not all of them will matter. Then you may explain which you do. I will, Voss replied, when they begin to align. He moved to the desk and rested his hand on the ledger once more. This book records a history of silence, he said. Silence is not absence. It leaves patterns, and patterns once seen cannot be unseen. He looked at Reverend Pike. You said the son came to you, he said, years ago. What did he want? The vicar hesitated. Then he said he wanted confirmation, not proof. He already suspected. And what did you give him? I gave him nothing he could use to harm another. Did you give him enough to harm himself? Pike's expression tightened. I gave him the truth that his life was not an accident. That is often the most dangerous truth of all, Voss said. Captain Harrow shifted his weight. You are speaking as though this man were a stranger. But you say he is here, among us. Yes. Then he has a face, a voice, a history we can examine. Indeed. Then let us examine it. Voss inclined his head. Very well. He turned toward Cresswell, who had remained largely silent until now. Mr. Cresswell, he said, you arrived yesterday afternoon. Yes. Sir Edmund's request. Yes. You were to oversee a change in the will. Cresswell adjusted his glasses. That is correct. And yet no change was signed. No. Did Sir Edmund explain why? He wished the family a present before making his declaration. What was that declaration of concern? Cresswell hesitated. Inspector Merritt leaned forward. You will answer. The solicitor exhaled slowly. He intended to acknowledge an heir. Clara's hand went to her mouth. Captain Harrow swore again, more softly this time. Lady Helena's expression did not change, but her posture became even more rigid. And that heir, Voss said, was the son. Yes. And the estate would pass to him? In part, Cresswell replied. A substantial portion. Mrs. Vale's eyes closed briefly. Voss watched. Did you know this? He asked. Yes, she said. And how did you feel? She opened her eyes. Relieved. The answer surprised them. Inspector Merritt frowned. Relieved? He was threatening to expose you. He was threatening to expose himself, she said. The difference matters. Clara looked at her. You wanted him to acknowledge the child. Yes. Even after everything? Mrs. Vale's voice softened, just slightly. Especially after everything. Voss nodded once. Then he turned to Captain Harrow. You had debts, he said. Sir Edmund discovered them. Yes. And used them to break your engagement. Yes. But he also offered you something. Harrow frowned. What do you mean? Way to recover your position. That is nonsense, is it? Voss asked. A man like Sir Edmund does not destroy without offering terms. What did he propose? Harrow's gaze flickered, just once. That was enough, he suggested. Harrow said slowly, that if I remained useful, certain matters might be reconsidered. Useful in what way? Harrow hesitated. Then he said, he wished me to assist in managing the estate transition to the new heir. Yes. And you agreed? I listened. That is not the same. No, Harrow admitted. It is not. Voss turned away from him. Then, quietly, he said, you listened because you hoped to control the outcome. Harrow did not deny it. Clara looked at him with something like disappointment. You said you were protecting me, she said. I was, he replied, in the only way available to me. By aligning yourself with the man who humiliated us both, Harrow's voice hardened, by ensuring that I was not discarded entirely. You speak of principles, Clara. I speak of survival. Voss observed the exchange without interruption. Then he turned to Reverend Pike again. You knew the heir existed, he said. You knew Sir Edmund intended to reveal him. You knew the consequences. Yes. And yet you did not act. I am not the arbiter of men's decisions. No, Voss said. but you are the keeper of their confessions. Pike looked at him, and for the first time there was something like anger in his expression. I do not weaponize what is entrusted to me, he said, even when silence causes harm. Even then, Voss considered that. Then he nodded. Very well. He moved toward the window. Outside, the light had begun to fade. The fountain stood in shadow now, the ivory-handled knife barely visible. The heir, Voss said, came to this house not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged. Inspector Merritt crossed his arms. You keep saying that. Then say who it is. Turned. His gaze moved slowly across the room, from Clara, to Harrow, to Pike, to Cresswell, to Mrs. Vale, to Lady Helena. He stopped. Then he said, the man who was not introduced. Silence. Inspector Merritt frowned. That is not an answer. It is, Voss replied. Simply not understood it yet. Clara shook her head. There was no one unintroduced. Everyone present was known to us. Known, Voss said, is not the same as recognized. He stepped closer to the desk. The heir did not arrive last night, he continued. He has been here longer than any of you have allowed yourselves to see. Mrs. Vale's hands trembled just once. Reverend Pike closed his eyes. Captain Harrow looked sharply. Clara's breath caught. Inspector Merritt's expression shifted from irritation to something more focused. You are narrowing it, he said. Yes. To whom? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and removed the pale blue ribbon. He studied the knots. Then, slowly, he untied one more. The contradictions are resolving, he said. He looked at Reverend Pike, then at Mrs. Vale, then at the ledger, and finally, the small brass bell on the mantel. When a man prepares to confess, Voss said quietly, he chooses his witness. He stepped forward, and Sir Edmund did not choose his family. The room seemed to contract. Clara whispered, Then who? Voss's gaze did not waver. One person who already knew the truth, he said. Reverend Pike opened his eyes. Captain Harrow took a step back. Inspector Merritt leaned forward. Mrs. Vale did not move, and Voss, with quiet certainty, added, The one person he could not deceive. Chapter 8. The witness who could not be lied to. It was not an accusation that filled the study. It was inevitable. Reverend Amos Pike did not step back when Voy's gaze settled upon him. He did not protest. He did not even attempt to interrupt the slow tightening of attention that gathered around him like a drawn cord. Instead, he lowered himself into the nearest chair. The movement was careful, deliberate. A man choosing to sit before being made to stand. Clara stared at him, disbelief giving way to something more painful. Recognition not of guilt, but of proximity. Of all the people in the house, the vicar had seemed least capable of harm, which made him, Voss thought, the most dangerous place to hide truth. Reverend Inspector Merritt said, tone now controlled but firm, You will explain yourself. Pike folded his hands. I will explain, he said, but I will not simplify. Captain Harrow gave a short, strained laugh. For once I should prefer simplicity. You have preferred it all your life, Pike replied quietly. It has not served you particularly well. Harrow fell silent. Voss remained where he was, near the mantel, one hand resting lightly on the wood, as though grounding himself in something that did not shift. You were the one Sir Edmund intended to tell, Voss said. Yes, not his sister, not his niece, not his solicitor. No, because you already knew. Pike nodded because Voss continued. You were the only one who could hear the truth without being altered by it. That is what he believed, Pike said. And what did you believe? Vicar looked down at his hands. I believe, he said slowly, that he wished to confess without surrendering control. He wanted absolution, consequence. Clara's voice trembled. And you would have given it to him? No, Pike said. The word landed quietly. But I would have listened, he added, and in listening I would have forced him to hear himself. Voss inclined his head slightly. That is a more demanding form of mercy. Inspector Merritt stepped forward. This is all very philosophical, Reverend, but a man is dead. Did you alter the tonic? Pike looked up. No. Did you place poison anywhere in that room? No. Then what did you do? The vicar's gaze shifted, not to Merritt, but to Mrs. Vale. She did not look at him. I told him the truth, Pike said. Voss's eyes narrowed slightly. Before dinner, he said. Yes, and what truth was that? Pike hesitated. Then he said that the son had already learned who he was. The room reacted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a series of small telling ways. Clara's breath caught. Harrow's hand tightened on his cane. Cresswell looked up sharply. Mrs. Vale's shoulders lowered, as though a weight she had expected had finally been placed. And how did Sir Edmund respond? Voss asked. He was Displeased. That is a mild word. He was angry, Pike said. Not because the truth had been discovered, because it had been discovered without his permission. Control again, Voss murmured. Yes. Inspector Merritt frowned. And this led to what? To a decision, Pike said. What decision? That he would reveal the truth that very night. Not as a confession, as a declaration. Clara whispered. The will. Yes, Pike said. He intended to announce the heir public, to force acceptance before anyone could object. Captain Harrow let out a low breath. And you told him that was wrong. I told him it was insufficient, Pike replied. Truth does not become just because it is spoken loudly. And then? Pike looked at Voss. And then I left him. Voss studied him. Did you believe he would proceed regardless? Yes. And did you believe that would cause harm? Yeah. Then why did you not intervene further? Pike's expression changed, not defensively, but with a kind of weary honesty. Because I am not responsible for the choices of other men, he said, only for what I choose to do in response to them. And what did you choose? I chose not to assist him. Silence followed. Voss did not speak immediately. He walked slowly to the desk and picked up the small glass vial again. He held it to the light, turning it slightly, watching the darker residue settle and shift. Then he said, You did not poison him. No. You did not alter the tonic. No. You did not prepare the tart. No. And yet, Voss said softly, you changed the course of the evening. Pike did not deny it. Inspector Merritt exhaled. Then we are back where we started. The vicar has motive but no method. The housekeeper has opportunity but denies intent. The heir is present but unidentified. Not unidentified, Voss said. Merritt looked at him sharply. Then say it. Voss set the vial down. The heir, he said, is the one person in this room whose presence has been accepted without question. Clara frowned. That applies to all of us. No, Voss replied. It applies to one of you more than the others. Captain Harrow straightened. You are narrowing it again. Yes, to whom? Voss did not answer. Instead, he walked to the window once more. The light had faded further now. The fountain was almost entirely in shadow. The ivory-handled knife was no longer visible. Objects placed in plain sight, Voss said quietly, are often meant to be seen by only one person. He turned back. The knife at the fountain, he continued. It was not a weapon, it was a signal. Inspector Merritt frowned. A signal to whom? To the one who would understand it. Clara's voice was barely audible. What does it mean? Voss looked at her. It means, he said, the past has already declared itself. He moved back toward the centre of the room. Sir Edmund intended to control the revelation, he continued. Reverend Pike ensured that he could not do so without consequence. Mrs. Vale prepared the evening as she always had, but with knowledge she had not possessed before. You, Miss Radcliffe, altered the seating to prevent humiliation. Captain Harrow positioned himself to benefit from whatever outcome emerged. And the heir? Merritt pressed. Voss's gaze moved once more across them all. Then, he said, the heir did not act out of anger. Clara shook her head. Then why? He acted out of necessity, Voss said. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes again. Reverend Pike lowered his head. Captain Harrow took a step back. Inspector Merritt's expression sharpened. You are about to accuse someone, he said. Voss did not deny it, but he did not speak them. Not yet. Instead, he said the poison was not placed to kill. The words landed like a fracture. Clara stared at him. What? It was placed, Voss continued. To stop. Inspector Merritt frowned. That makes no sense. It makes perfect sense, Voss replied, if one understands that death was not the intended outcome. Captain Harrow's voice was tight. You are suggesting this was an accident. I am suggesting, Voss said, that the line between intention and consequence was crossed without being seen. Mrs. Vale's voice was barely a whisper. I told him not to take it. Every eye turned to her. Voss did not move. You told him, he said, because you knew it had been altered. She nodded once. And yet he did. Yes. Why? Mrs. Vale opened her eyes. Because he did not believe I would harm him. The room held its breath. Voss inclined his head slightly. And he was right, he said. Inspector Merritt stared. Then who? Voss raised his hand. Not yet, he said. He looked at Mrs. Vale. You knew the tonic had been changed, he said. You warned him. That means you discovered the alteration before he drank it. Yes. How? She hesitated. Then she said, because I saw who did it. The room seemed to contract. A step forward. Who? Captain Harrow's cane struck the floor once, sharply. Reverend Pike did not look up. Inspector Merritt leaned in, and Voss, watching Mrs. Vale with absolute stillness, said softly, Now, madame, you will tell us. The truth you have protected all these years. Mrs. Vale did not look at the inspector. She did not look at Clara. She did not look at Harrow. She looked at Voss. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not agreement, not trust, but recognition. Then she said, "I will tell you." A pause. And then, "But you will not like what it means." Chapter 9, The Truth. She could not give kindly Mrs. Vale did not rush. That, more than anything, unsettled. People who intend to deceive often hurry. To outrun contradiction, force belief before doubt, can gather itself. But Mrs. Vale stood where she was, her hands steady at her sides, her breathing even, as though she had already accepted the cost of what she was about to say, and found it preferable to silence. Voss did not interrupt her. He had moved slightly aside, no longer occupying the centre of the room. It was a small gesture, but a precise one. He was not removing himself from the truth. He was making space for it to arrive without obstruction. Inspector Merritt, by contrast, leaned forward with visible impatience. "Well," he said, "you claim you saw who altered the tonic. Then say it plainly, Mrs." Vale turned her head slightly, not toward the inspector, but toward Clara. It was not an accusation. It was something more difficult. Clara felt it. She took a small step backward, as though the floor itself had shifted. "Mrs. Vale," she said. The housekeeper's voice, when it came, was low and controlled. "I did not see the moment the bottle was opened," she said, "but I saw the hand that replaced it." Captain Harrow exhaled sharply. The hand again. "Yes," Mrs. Vale said. Careful, deliberate, not uncertain, Voss inclined his head slightly. "And this time you saw more than the ring." "Yes." "Then we are finished with this guessing, Ings. Who was it?" Vale did not answer immediately. She looked at Clara, then at Reverend Pike, then, finally, at Captain Harrow. The room reacted before the words were spoken. Harrow stiffened. "No. You were in the study," Mrs. Vale said quietly. "I was not alone," he replied quickly. "Others had access. You were there after the vicar left. You believed no one would notice. That is absurd. You removed the bottle," she said. "You held it to the light. Just as Monsieur Voss has done, you opened it. You added something. Then you replace it exactly as you found it." Harrow shook his head too quickly. "You are mistaken." "I am not." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "Captain Harrow, you will answer this." Harrow's gaze moved from the inspector to Clara. "Do you believe this?" he asked her. Clara did not speak. Silence was not uncertain. It was comprehension. "You were in the study," she said slowly. "You said you were looking for Uncle." "I was." "And you did not find him?" "No." "But you found the bottle." Harrow's jaw tightened. "I examined it, yes. That is not a crime." "And you altered it?" "No." The denial was firm, too firm. Voss watched him carefully. "Captain," he said, "you are a man accustomed to strategy. You do not act without considering the outcome." Harrow turned toward him. "Then consider this. If I had wished to kill Sir Edmund, would I have chosen a method so easily traced to me? Would I have remained in the house afterward?" "Perhaps," Voss said. "If you believed the method would not kill him." Harrow's expression flickered. "Just one." That was enough. Inspector Merritt seized it. "You thought it would not be fatal." "I thought." Harrow stopped. The room leaned toward him. "What did you think?" Merritt pressed. Harrow exhaled sharply. "I thought it would make him ill," he said. "Nothing more." Clara stared at him. "You admit it?" "I admit," he said, "that I intended to stop him." "Stop him from what?" "From making that declaration," Harrow said. "From destroying everything, your position, your name, the structure of this house. And you believed poisoning him was the solution." "I did not poison him," Harrow snapped. "I altered a tonic, a small amount, enough to weaken him, enough to delay whatever performance he..." Mrs. Vale's voice was quiet. "You misjudged the measure." Harrow looked at her, anger rising. "You said nothing." "I warned him," she said. "And he ignored you." "Yes." Inspector Merritt shook his head. "So you admit it. You tampered tant with the tonic." "Yes," Harrow said. "But I did not intend to kill him. Intent does not erase consequence." "No," Harrow replied, "but it explains it." Clara took another step back. "You said you were protecting me," she said. "I was. By risking murder, by preventing ruin," he said. "You do not understand what would have happened if he had named that heir. You would have been displaced, reduced. Everything you believe yourself to be would have been adjusted. And you believed that justified this?" Harrow's voice softened slightly. "I believed it was necessary." Clara shook her head. "No," she said. "You believed it was yours to decide." The words landed harder than any accusation. Harrow did not respond. Voss stepped forward slightly. "Captain Harrow," he said, "explained your action. You have explained your intention. But you have not explained the most important detail. Harrow looked at him warily. Which is? The substance you added. Harrow hesitated. Then he said, a compound I acquired during my service. It induces weakness, disorientation. Nothing more. Nothing more, Voss repeated. Yes. And you are certain of this? Harrow's confidence faltered. Believed I was, he said. Voss nodded slowly. Belief, he said, is a fragile foundation for action. Inspector Merritt stepped forward. We will verify the substance. If it is as you claim, it will not be, Voss said. Merritt turned sharply. What? Voss looked at the vial on the desk. The colour is wrong, he said. The residue is too dark. The reaction was too severe. Harrow frowned. That is impossible. No, Voss replied. It is inevitable. The room stilled again. Clara whispered. Then what happened? Voss did not answer immediately. He looked at Mrs. Vale, then at the ledger, then at the small brass bell, and finally, portrait of Lady Radcliffe. When multiple intentions converge, he said quietly, they do not cancel each other. He stepped back. Inspector Merritt frowned. Meaning? Meaning, Voss said, that Captain Harrow did not act alone in altering the outcome. Harrow's head snapped up. What? You altered the tonic, Voss said. But something else had already altered it before. Silence. Clara's breath caught. Mrs. Vale's eyes closed. Reverend Pike did not move. Inspector Merritt stared. You are saying there were two. I am saying, Voss interrupted gently, that the tonic was already changed before Captain Harrow touched it. Harrow shook his head. That is not possible. I saw no sign of it. You saw what you expected to see, Voss said, and nothing more. Clara's voice trembled. Then who? Voss raised his hand again. Not yet, he said. He looked at Mrs. Vale. You knew, he said. She opened her eyes. Yes, and you said nothing. Warned him, she replied. But you did not reveal the truth. No. Why? Mrs. Vale's voice was almost inaudible. Because it would have destroyed him. Voss's gaze did not waver. And now? She looked at him. Now, there was something else in her expression. Fear, not grief. Something closer to release. Now, she said, it will destroy someone else. The room seemed to hold its breath once more. Inspector Merritt stepped forward. Then say it, he demanded. Clara's hands trembled. Captain Harrow stood very still. Reverend Pike closed his eye. Voss, watching them all, said quietly, Yes, madam. A pause. Then, say it. Chapter 10. What was done out of love, Mrs. Vale did not raise her voice. She did not point. She did not accuse. Instead, she took one step forward, into the centre of the room that had belonged to Sir Edmund's control, and spoke as though she were placing something fragile onto a table where it could no longer be hidden. I altered it first, she said. The words were simple. They broke everything. Inspector Merritt stared at her. You, what? I altered the tonic, she repeated. Before Captain Harrow entered the study, before anyone else touched it, Clara made a small stunned sound. No, Captain Harrow shook his head. That cannot be. It is, Mrs. Vale said. Her gaze moved to Voss, not for permission, for completion. Voss inclined his head once. Continue, he said softly. Mrs. Vale drew a slow breath. For years, she said, Sir Edmund took that tonic every evening. He believed it strengthened. He believed it gave him control over his own body, just as he believed he controlled everything else in this house. Inspector Merritt's voice sharpened. And you decided to interfere with that. I decided, she said, to weaken him. Clara's hands came to her mouth. Why? Mrs. Vale looked at her. Because he was going to speak, not to confess, not to make amends, to declare, to shift the truth in a way that would protect himself and harm everyone else. And you believed making him ill would stop that? Yes. You could have told someone, Clara said. You could have. Told whom? Vale asked quietly. You? So you could beg him to be kind, Lady Helena? So she could ensure the matter was buried more deeply? The inspector? The scandal would spread before the truth could be understood. Mrs. Vale continued. I did not wish him dead, she said. I wished him to be silent. Voss watched her carefully. And so you altered the tonic, he said. Yes. With what? Mrs. Vale hesitated. Then she said, a preparation I have used in the past. It induces weakness. It slows the body. It does not kill. Captain Harrow exhaled sharply. The same as I? No, Voss said. Harrow stopped. The same intention, Voss continued. Not the same outcome. Mrs. Vale's voice remained steady. I measured it carefully. I have spent my life measuring food, time, consequence. I knew what it would do. And yet, Inspector Merritt said, he died. Yes. Silence followed. It was not accusatory, it was final. Voss stepped forward slightly. "You altered the tonic," he said. "Then you returned to the kitchen." "Yes." And later, Captain Harrow entered the study and altered it again. "Yes." Harrow's voice was tight. "I did not know." "You could not have known," Voss said. "That is precisely the point." He turned to the others. "This is where intention becomes irrelevant," he said. Two actions, each designed to weaken, combined into something neither intended. Clara's voice trembled. "You both tried to stop him." "Yes," Voss said. "And instead, you ended him." The words settled into the room with quiet certainty. Captain Harrow looked at Mrs. Vale. "You said nothing," he said. "I warned him," she replied. "You did not warn me." Mrs. Vale's gaze did not shift. "You did not ask." Harrow let out a bitter breath. "You believed yourself the only one capable of acting." "I believed myself responsible," she said. "For what?" he demanded. "For what he did," she replied. The room stilled again. Clara lowered her hands. "What he did," she repeated. "You mean—" "Yes," Mrs. Vale said. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The ledger, the letter, the years of silence, all of it had already spoken. Voss inclined his head slightly. "And the child," he said. Mrs. Vale's expression softened. "He was not meant to carry this," she said. "Yet he does." "Yes." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "Where is he?" Mrs. Vale did not answer. Instead, she looked at Voss. He held her gaze. Then he said, "He is here," Clara whispered. "Who?" Voss turned. His gaze moved across the room once more, not searching, confirming. Then he said, "Reverend Pike." The name did not explode. It settled. Reverend Pike did not react immediately. He remained seated, his hands still folded, his head slightly bowed. Then slowly he lifted his eyes. Clara stared at him. "No." Captain Harrow stepped back. "That is impossible." Inspector Merritt frowned. "The vicar?" Voss nodded. "Yes," Reverend Pike exhaled. It was not a sigh of relief. It was something quieter, acceptance. "Wondered when you would say it," he said. Clara shook her head. "You how?" "My mother did not tell me," Pike said. "Not directly. But there are truths that do not require words. They exist in the way people look at you. In this way they avoid looking. Mrs. Vale closed her eyes. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I know," he replied gently. "And Sir Edmund, he never acknowledged me," Pike said. "Not in any way that mattered. But he knew. And I knew he knew." Inspector Merritt stepped forward. "And you intended to let him confess?" "I intended to hear him," Pike said. "Nothing more. And if he had declared you his heir," Pike's expression not change, "I would have refused." Silence. Clara whispered. "Why?" "Because truth does not require inheritance," he said. "And because I would not allow my life to be defined by his." Voss watched him carefully. "And yet," he said, "you came here. You remained. You did not leave when you learned the truth." Pike nodded. "Because leaving would not have changed it." "No," Voss agreed. "It would not." Inspector Merritt looked between them. "Then the matter is clear. Two individuals altered the tonic. The combined effect caused death. That constitutes a tragedy," Voss said. Merritt frowned. "Constitutes a crime." "Yes," Voss said. "But not the one you expected." He turned to Mrs. Vale. "You acted out of protection," he said. "Yes." He turned to Captain Harrow. "You acted out of control." Harrow did not respond. He turned to Reverend Pike. "You acted out of truth." Pike inclined his head slightly. "And Sir Edmund," Voss said, "acted out of power." The room held that. Then Clara spoke, voice quiet but steady. "And what happens now?" Inspector Merritt straightened. "Now we proceed according to the law." Voss did not contradict him, but he did not agree. Instead, he looked at Mrs. Vale, then at Pike, then at Clara, and finally at the desk where the ledger lay closed. "The law will decide what to do with actions," he said. He paused, then added, "It cannot decide what to do with consequences." The words lingered. Mrs. Vale lowered her head. Captain Harrow looked away. Reverend Pike closed his eyes. Clara stood very still, and Voss, watching them all, said quietly, "This was not a murder that sought death." He turned toward the door. "It was a truth that arrived too late to be gentle." Chapter 11. The silence that remained. No one left the study immediately. The truth had been spoken. Truth does not dismiss a room the way a verdict does. It lingers. It rearranges what people thought they knew about themselves, asks questions that no inspector can record and no court can settle. Inspector Merritt was the first to recover his function. He cleared his throat, glanced once at the closed ledger, and then at Mrs. Vale and Captain Harrow. "There will be statements," he said, "formal ones. The matter will be examined. Intent will be weighed against outcome. His voice carried the structure of law, but not its certainty. Captain Harrow gave a short, hollow laugh. You will find intent in abundance. The outcome has already been announced. Merritt did not answer him. He was looking at Mrs. Vale. You understand, he said, that you have admitted to altering a substance that contributed to Sir Edmund's death. Yes, she said. Her tone had not changed. It did not ask for mercy. I did not expect it. And you? Merritt said, turning to Harrow. Harrow straightened. The effort was visible now. I have admitted the same, he said, though my measure was not intended to kill. Nor was mine, Mrs. Vale said. No, Harrow replied. Nor was yours. They did not look at each other again. Reverend Pike rose slowly from his chair. He seemed, in that moment, older than he had when the morning began. Not weakened, clarified. There is something further, he said. Merritt looked at him sharply. If you have information relevant to the case. It is not the case, Pike said. It is for the truth. Voss watched him, very still. Pike stepped forward, into the same space Mrs. Vale had occupied before. I knew the tonic had been altered, he said. The room shifted. Inspector Merritt frowned. What? I saw Mrs. Vale in the study earlier, Pike continued. I saw her replace the bottle. I did not know what she had done, but I knew she had done something. Clara stared at him. You knew? Yes. And you said nothing? Yes. Why? Pike looked at her. Because I believed, he said, that whatever she had done was meant to prevent harm. And Captain Harrow? Merritt pressed. Did you see him? No. Then you allowed Sir Edmund to drink from a bottle you suspected had been altered? Yes. Clara's voice broke slightly. That is not protection, that is judgment, Pike said. Silence followed. Not shocked this time, not even surprised. Only the slow, difficult acceptance that responsibility had spread further than anyone had wished to admit. Voss inclined his head slightly. You did not act, he said. No, you chose to let events proceed. Yes. Because you believed the outcome would be less harmful than the alternative. Yes. And you were wrong. Pike closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The words settled with more weight than any defence could have carried. Inspector Merritt exhaled slowly. Then we have 3 individuals whose actions contributed to the death. He paused, and one whose death was the result. He looked at Voss. You have your truth. I have my report. Voss did not move. Your report, he said. Describe actions. Yes. It will assign responsibility. Yes. It will conclude. Yes. Voss inclined his head. And yet, he said, will not explain. Merritt's expression tightened. Explanation is not my duty. No, Voss agreed. It is not. He turned away from the inspector and walked slowly to the window. Outside evening had settled fully over the grounds. The fountain was no longer visible, only a darker shape within the darkness. The small, ivory-handled knife had disappeared into shadow. The first object we noticed, Voss said quietly, has now been forgotten. Clara looked at him. The knife? Yes. What did it mean? Voss did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the pale blue ribbon. The knots were many now. He studied them. Then, slowly, he began to untie them, one by one. Each movement is deliberate. Each pause is measured. When he had finished, the ribbon lay straight again, unmarked, as though the contradictions it had recorded had never existed. He folded it once and returned it to his pocket. The knife was placed to be seen, he said. Not by all. By one. Clara stepped closer. By whom? Voss turned. By the way, he said. Reverend Pike's gaze lifted. It was placed where he would pass it, Voss continued. Where he would recognize it. Recognize what? Clara asked. Recognition itself, Voss replied. A signal that the past had been acknowledged, that it would not remain hidden. Mrs. Vale's voice was quiet. I placed it. Clara looked at her. Why? Because I could not speak to him, she said. Not then. Not with everything still uncertain. But I could show him that I knew, that I had not forgotten. Pike closed his eyes again. Saw it, he said. I understood. And you said nothing, Clara whispered. Yes. Again, yes. Clara turned away, not in anger, in something more complex. Something that did not yet have a name. Inspector Merritt closed his notebook. This will take time, he said. There will be inquiries. Statements. Decision. He looked at each of them in turn. No one leaves the estate without informing me. There were nods, quiet ones, practical ones. The machinery of consequence had begun. Voss stepped away from the window. He did not look at Merritt. He did not look at Harrow. He did not look at Mrs. Vale. He looked at Clara. You wished to prevent humiliation, he said. Yes. You altered the course of the evening. Yes. "And now?" Clara held his gaze. "Now," she said, "I will not alter anything." Voss inclined his head. "That is a beginning." He turned toward the door. Reverend Pike spoke. "Monsieur Voss." Voss paused. "You have seen everything," Pike said. "You understand more than any of us. Tell me." He hesitated, then finished. "Was there ever a way this could have ended different?" Voss did not answer immediately. He stood at the threshold, his hand resting lightly against the wood. Then he said, "Yes, the word did not comfort me. It did not accuse. It simply existed." Pike closed his eyes. "And why did it not?" Voss looked at him. "Because each of you chose to act alone," he said. He paused, then added, very quietly, "And truth is the one thing that cannot survive being divided." He stepped into the corridor. Behind him, the study remained unchanged in its arrangement. The desk, the ledger, the bell, the portrait, all of it exactly as it had been. And yet, nothing within it was the same. Outside, the night had settled completely. The fountain held only darkness, but at its edge, one stood close enough. One might still see the faint outline of the small ivory-handled knife, resting where it had been placed, waiting for no one, and marking the place where silence had finally ended.